I have finished another one of John Austen's books, more of Hollywood's Unsolved Mysteries. I actually have the first one. I didn't order it until later, so I had started this one already, which is why they're kind of out of order. And yes, these books are older, and I've mentioned before, because I did a review of another one of his books for Garb August, that he is like a Hollywood tabloid type writer. He reminds me a lot of the Kenneth Anger, the Hollywood Babylon, only Kenneth Anger's very bitter and very catty and just plain outright mean in his Hollywood Babylon. John Austen is not so much, where Anger seems to like really revel in the fact that he's catching these people and they've got all this dirty laundry and all this other sort of stuff. John Austen seems very sympathetic to the situation some of these people have ended up in. He's very, very sympathetic to Marilyn Monroe in this. He's very sympathetic to Lupe Valadez, who I remember that, specifically that article or chapter or whatever you call it, that Kenneth Anger wrote in Hollywood Babylon about Lupe Valadez, and that was because that was the first time I'd ever heard of her, and he just like really absolutely reveled in the fact that, oh, she like died face down in her toilet, that sort of a thing, where John Austen looks at it very differently, and he does say, yes, this is where she ended up, but look at how she was treated to end up here. And I think that is the big difference, and that is the big reason that I'm not as like creeped out by John Austen's assessment of stuff. Anger, it was very, it's very exploitative, and it's very, very much, you can tell he is trying to stick it to these famous people. Whereas John Austen's not really. He more than anything seems very sympathetic to the women who were involved in certain situations, because he is very aware that there is a casting couch situation, and he's very aware of, you know, some of these women are very naive and being taken advantage of by very powerful men. And if we know anything is true, that is still true, or we wouldn't have the whole Weinstein situation that just happened. And Austen is he's very sympathetic to people he feels were taken advantage of. He's sympathetic to Elvis, which is interesting to me, that he's sympathetic in the fact that he feels like he was taken advantage of by his, which we know a little bit about it here because Elvis is such a big deal in Tennessee, but that colonel person who was like his manager, who really did seem like he took advantage. He seemed like a carny hack who just kind of took advantage of Elvis, and Elvis just sort of let him for whatever reason. And Austen kind of comments on that and talks about that a little bit, of how that seemed very, very much like Elvis was being exploited by this man, and that might have been part of the reason that he had such substance abuse issues and different things, is that was one of the things that the colonel could kind of do for him and keep him under control in that way. So he's very sympathetic about certain people who end up in these certain situations. He's not sympathetic to people he thinks have been taking advantage of situations, because he was not at all to Burt Reynolds in that other book, where he kind of pretty much accused him of murder, which is an interesting bent on that. The whole Jean Harlow situation, I don't know how much of that I believe in here, because there's a lot of layers to that and hearsay and different things that's going on, but you do feel very badly for Jean Harlow, that she is just kind of cornered in a situation that she can't do much about. He talks about Carol Landis, who just was, for some reason, just targeted by some of these Hollywood bigwig women and just slandered for whatever reason, to the point that she does commit suicide. There's a lot of implication with Rex Harris in the whole thing, that it's just very that, and he even says he does not know why she was picked out, what it was about her that made these women target her so much. He even says he can't figure out what the purpose was behind that. But he goes on about how awful it was, and how every time she would do anything, you would end up with this huge amount of people who were just absolutely bashing her background and bringing up all these stories about, oh, she was this, she was that, she was this, that, and the other. And whether they were true or not, that's neither here nor there. And that whole situation is just sad. And I think he really tries to bring that out. The other one that I'd never heard anything about before, didn't really even know who it was Nick Adams, who was in that movie No Time for Sergeants, and he was in a TV show and different things like that. And he has some questions about his death. Austin seems to have some very, very legitimate questions about whether this was a suicide at all, because it didn't seem like it. And there was a really hinky, shady lawyer who was friends with him who just sort of seemed to show up, and items from the house went missing, and these were like personal items, and suddenly showed up with the lawyer, and this attorney was like, he was the one who found Nick Adams. And there's just a lot of weirdness with that particular death that Austin is at least wanting to bring some light to. Now, at least in that case, the attorney didn't end up well either, so if he did anything, he kind of got the karma revolving door. But it's a lot of different cases here that are very obscure, I would say, in some of this. And that is kind of what John Austen's book, the other one I had read, was kind of obscure stuff too. It wasn't stuff that you heard so much about. And it was also some of the stuff that I'd heard from with Hollywood Babylon, only treated in a much more humane way a lot of times with this one. Now, that being said, I have watched some more horror movies. As I was saying, I was trying to watch, I'm a little behind, but I was trying to watch a horror movie a day. I have now watched the original Mummy, which is so boring. I hate to say it, I understand why that one, again, is not one of the bigger Universal monsters. The makeup is amazing, but the whole story just drags, because it starts out with this mummy that a archaeologist assistant, he of course does the thing where he opens the box that he's not supposed to open, and then goes crazy because he has awakened a mummy, and then the mummy takes a really long time trying to find his lost love, which thankfully the absolute classic of a movie, the Brendan Fraser Mummy, it took some of those elements that worked and then turned it into an action movie. And that's really what this felt like it should have been, because the mummy's not necessarily really scary. He's slow moving. He's kind of got his own mission on things. He's not like just out there to murder everyone. It's just you're just kind of in his way. So as an actual threat, he's a little on the low side, but that's why the Mummy movie, the Brendan Fraser movie, works so much better, and took those elements and made that work as an actual adventure movie. I watched that one. I watched Godzilla Raids Again, which is one of the more boring of the Godzilla movies. And then I watched Invasion of Astro Monster, which is I think it's the introduction of Ghidorah in the Godzilla pantheon. And this was kind of when the Godzilla movies got a little bit silly. At this stage in Toho Productions, they had realized they were being competed with by the Gamera movies, the classic flying turtle movies that were aimed towards kids. So they realized kids really love big monsters, and they started taking this more serious tone that they had to Godzilla and turning it more kid friendly. And Invasion of Astro Monster, which I think also is Invasion of Monster X in America, and sometimes just Monster X. But this is the first time you sort of see that sort of silliness start to be, and it really shows, because Godzilla like does a dance at one point. At one point in time, he's like shuffling like a boxer and punching Ghidorah, and it just there is some silliness to the whole thing, a lot of silliness. Now, ironically, when I was watching it, I realized that the American actor in it, the only American actor in the whole thing, was in fact Nick Adams, who I had just read about in this book about his death. He is in Invasion of Astro Monster, and he's the main, the American in it. That they always throw an American in there, and he is the American in there. And that was an interesting coincidence, because I don't really think I had paid attention to see anything. I know I've seen Rebel Without a Cause, and he has a small part in it, but he had not really been in anything that I'd ever paid attention to, and there he was in that particular horror movie. So he's not a terrible actor, and that's even what John Austen said, that he's from Appalachia. He's from Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania part of Appalachia. And if you hear him talking in this movie, he has a really like Jersey accent, and that's apparently because he spent a lot of his time as a pool hall hustler over in that area, and was a good mimic and would pick up like Cagney accents and different accents and different things, and that's what he's using in this one. So it's sort of interesting when you're looking at this guy that very clearly you knew this is where he came from, but he's pulling an accent that does not sound anything like what he should have had. But again, this is one of the sillier of the monster movies, and in the Godzilla pantheon again. It is, like I said, the introduction of Ghidorah, who I think has one of the coolest designs of all the kaiju that show up. I love Godzilla, and I love Godzilla movies, and I think Ghidorah just looks cool. He's always, even when the production value was low, he was a cool looking monster, just because of his design had to be more. Godzilla gets looking goofy as some of those costumes start to devolve into, they're all rubber suits, but as they start to devolve in quality and different things that they look like. Thankfully, Ghidorah does not look so horrible, nor does Mothra ever, just because their general design. But some of the other ones do look absolutely terrible as time goes on. But anyway, so my horror movies have kind of not been great. Of the past couple ones that I've watched, so I'm going to try to turn it around and watch some that I know I will like, just because I like the directors of some of these different ones, and see if I can get some Sam Raimi and some John Carpenter, who's one of my favorite directors, can get some of those movies in here to make it a little more palatable in just watching really bad 60s movies at this stage, and wishing I was watching the actual Brendan Fraser mummy movie rather than the one that's the Boris Karloff. That great makeup, wonderful makeup, just kind of like Invisible Man was wonderful special effects, but suffered on some other levels quite a bit, like story, which seems important. But anyway, that is my review of some more Hollywood mysteries and some more horror movies that are of an older vintage at this point.